So with that, let's welcome Christopher John Bjerknes back to the program. I don't know how long it's been, Chris, but it's been a long time. Welcome back. This whole Einstein thing looms, according to your research, as one of the biggest frauds of modern history in terms of science, notoriety, and legend. It's an enormous story. And yet, of course, the Jewish-controlled, Zionist-controlled mainstream media will not touch it. You'd think that they maybe would drag it out and debunk it, but oh no. No publicity is the best publicity. So they bury the story. Tell us about Albert Einstein and this accomplice of his, Mileva Einstein-Marady.
Mileva Einstein-Marady was Albert Einstein's first wife, and they were students together in Switzerland. And they worked together on their research and in their studies, and Mileva Einstein-Marady coached Albert Einstein in his mathematics. He was always very weak in mathematics. When Einstein passed away in 1955, a famous Soviet physicist, Abram Yoffa, who had seen the original manuscripts of the special theory of relativity, said that the author of those manuscripts was Einstein-Marady. And Einstein-Marady was Albert Einstein's wife. He never went by that name, and that's the name that she went by. And then later, a friend of Yoffa clarified that the original manuscripts of Einstein's famous 1905 papers were signed Einstein-Marady.
Let me ask you a quick question, a little bit aside from this, but it is apparently a matter of record that Albert worked in the patent office at some level of importance and may have taken certain liberties with the information that was coming to pass. Any truth to that in your research?
Absolutely. He worked in the patent office, and he not only had access to new ideas that people had, he had access to wonderful scientific libraries with the latest scientific data and publications from around the world. Well, if you're implying that he was taking people's patent ideas, I haven't researched that. My research focus is more on his plagiarism of scientific ideas, which he then published in Annalen der Physik in Germany. There is an issue related to Mileva Einstein-Marady that he did seek patents and had some innovations and inventions of his own that Mileva participated in, and she never got credit for it.
Behind every
extent, that's true, yes.
Behind every good man is a woman, right? In this case, it may have been a towering genius of a woman.
Absolutely. She was well ahead of her time. She was one of very few women to pursue the study of physics, and she did very well.
What happened to her after Al dumped her? Or maybe she dumped him, I don't know.
Well, they were divorced, I think, in 1914, and Albert Einstein married his cousin so that he could sleep with her and her daughters. He first tried to solicit her daughters to marry him, and they refused. And then he married his cousin.
All right. How old were these children? Do we know?
I think they were about 16 and 17. It's not only pedophilia, it's incest. And it was adultery because at that time he was married to Mileva.
Okay.
And he referred to the entire family that he then created as his small harem in his correspondence.
Oh, that's pretty damning. See, that further underscores the theory, the belief by some, the folklore that he did sleep with Marilyn Monroe. So,
and there is an extant letter from his wife's daughter where she wrote to Georg Nikolai that Albert was making sexual advances towards her, and she didn't reciprocate those feelings and didn't want anything to do with him. This was the cousin's daughter.
Onward with the story of Albert Einstein. He began to accrue notice as a relatively young physicist, and how much was it attributed to, I guess we could say, how much Mileva was there and how much was Albert involved? Was he just a conduit for her genius?
He may well have been, because there are many anecdotal accounts which portray him in a very negative light as being almost a charming idiot. And she, on the other hand, was always held in high esteem. But if she were so bright, why would she hook up with him?
Well, maybe she had a sex thing too. Who knows?
Who knows? She had some deformity that made it difficult for her to walk, and apparently she had a hard time finding a mate. And,
really? Well, that might have appealed to young, debauched Albert. Who knows?
And I think her intelligence appealed to him. I think he pursued her and not the other way around.
Most interesting.
He impregnated her early on and then abandoned her, and they had a daughter together named Liesel, who has disappeared from the record, and nobody knows what happened to that child. And then it was only later that they wed in 1903 and then had their son.
Okay. This is dastardly news for Einstein lovers, but Christopher has spent many, many years on this subject, digging and looking and reading. It's not just something he concocted on his own. All right, so tell us more about this Mileva. What happened to her after they were divorced? Do we know? Did she continue to work in physics? Did she ever let the cat out of the bag?
Well, she kind of had Einstein in a vice, because when they divorced, part of their divorce agreement stipulated that should he ever win the Nobel Prize, he was obliged to give her the winning. And he did not give her funds to take care of their children in any other context except when he won the Nobel Prize. He immediately paid her the full amount of money, and I believe it was hush money.
Oh, of course. Oh, yeah, sure.
The reason that she demanded those earnings is because he was winning the Nobel Prize because of his fame for papers that she wrote, or at least co-authored.
Wow, what a fascinating woman. I'd really like to see her get her just due in physics and in the scientific community. Is this something that you are essentially the first to really promulgate and to broadcast via your writings, that she existed and was apparently the genesis of what we think of as Einstein's genius?
I'm happy to say no, so that I don't have to stand alone on this. There was a physicist in Yugoslavia named Desenka Trubhović-Jurić who came across the obituary that Joffe wrote and immediately put two and two together and realized that Mileva was involved in publishing those papers. And she wrote a book, I believe it was in 1968, in Albert Einstein's Shadow, the tragic story of Mileva-Einstein marriage.
Oh, that book exists. Oh.
That book exists. It was translated into German, and I think in some of the translations, some of the accusations that she made disappeared, but I'm not clear on that. And then that was one strong thing that indicated that Mileva had done that. But then later, Einstein's correspondence to Mileva was published. And that correspondence frequently refers to their collaborative work on the theory of relativity and other things. And that rebuttressed the idea that she was his scientific collaborator. And a physicist, I think his name was, it escapes me at the moment, but a physicist published a paper exposing that. And he detailed the correspondence and how it indicated that they were partners. And then I discovered a biography published by Einstein's friend in 1921. It was the first biography of Einstein, and it came right after he became famous. And the man who wrote the biography was one of the people who promoted Einstein and said that he wanted to build a cult around Einstein. And in that book, he also revealed that Mileva was Albert Einstein's scientific collaborator. So those three independent things all point to the idea that she was his collaborator, and they were all expressed by people who had no awareness of the other thing. So it's three independent corroboration.
Very interesting.
Some of them from their own mouths, what Mileva said and what Albert Einstein said.
Okay. As his career continued and he grew older and became world famous, it is said that his work really never advanced a whole lot. beyond the original theory of relativity and that early work, which I'm hearing from you probably came from Mileva, most of it, maybe all of it, I don't know. Is there any truth to that his career really didn't plow any new ground? He didn't really turn in any new massive insights into E equals mc squared, the universe as we know it, or anything else. Did he do much after their marriage?
No, and it's very interesting that you say that and very insightful. I point that out in my book, that subsequent to his divorce, he did not do much, and he made many mistakes and ventured off into some very far-out things that didn't pan out.
Yes, I've read that. Yes, he was actually embarrassed by some of his stupidity, according to the things I've read. Not a lot of them, but some. He went off into weird and unusual areas that had no substantiation, and people were kind of questioning, why did he do that? Anyway, now we know.
And the one significant thing that he did after the divorce from Mileva was the general theory of relativity, but the incipient part of that began while he was still working with her, and then the fulfillment of that was completed by a man named David Hilbert.
He didn't even complete it. It was somebody else.
Absolutely. It was David Hilbert who came up with the generally covariant field equations of the general theory of relativity. And the other aspects of general relativity were also plagiarized from earlier sciences.
What was the fellow's name? David what?
David Hilbert.
Hilbert.
Yes, he was a famous mathematician at Göttingen University.
Was he Jewish?
No, he was not. His father was a Protestant preacher.
Okay, well, there's your point. Albert Einstein is the god of science, and that position is carefully manicured and maintained by the Jewish establishment. This is all fascinating. Oh, sure.
By design. They promoted him because he became a Zionist. And Zionism was becoming very unpopular, especially among Jews at the time, and they needed a spokesman. There was at that time a terrible insecurity among the Jewish people, because from ancient times, Jews were always viewed as the people of the book.
Yeah.
Whenever they studied, all they did was study the Torah and the Talmud and Kabbalah, and they never studied or pursued science and the arts. And they considered it chutzpah to create scientific laws, because those laws would make man greater than God. And they languished and lagged behind Europeans during the Renaissance. And Jews had a very bad reputation for being mentally sterile and for never producing geniuses.
Wow, fascinating.
They were signed Einstein-Merity.
Let me ask you a quick question, a little bit aside from this, but it is apparently a matter of record that Albert worked in the patent office at some level of importance and may have taken certain liberties with the information that was coming to pass. Any truth to that in your research? Of course, the Jewish-controlled, Zionist-controlled mainstream media will not touch it. You'd think that they maybe would drag it out and debunk it, but oh no. No publicity is the best publicity, so they bury the story. Tell us about Albert Einstein and this accomplice of his, Mileva Einstein-Merity.
Mileva Einstein-Merity was Albert Einstein's first wife, and they were students together in Switzerland. And they worked together on their research and in their studies, and Mileva Einstein-Merity coached Albert Einstein in his mathematics. He was always very weak in mathematics. When Einstein passed away in 1955, a famous Soviet physicist.
So with that, let's welcome Christopher John Bjerknes back to the program. I don't know how long it's been, Chris, but it's been a long time. Welcome back. This whole Einstein thing looms, according to your research, as one of the biggest frauds of modern history in terms of science, notoriety, and legend. It's an enormous story. And yet, of course,
Abram Yoffa, who had seen the original manuscripts of the special theory of relativity, said that the author of those manuscripts was Einstein-Merity. And Einstein-Merity was Albert Einstein's wife. He never went by that name, and that's the name that she went by. And then later, a friend of Joffe clarified that the original manuscripts of Einstein's famous 1905 papers